the town where murder was legal, Bodie's 20-year nightmare. In 18 days, this town produced more gold than anywhere else in America. 20 years later, it was a graveyard. The streets were paved with silver, the saloons never closed, and on average, someone died violently every single day. This is the story of Bodie, California, the deadliest boomtown in the American West, and how it destroyed itself from the inside out. Picture this. You're standing in the Sierra Nevada mountains, 8,000 feet above sea level. The year is 1859. The California gold rush has been raging for a decade, and most of the easy gold is gone. Thousands of prospectors have given up, heading home broke and broken. But one man, one stubborn, half-frozen prospector named William Bodie, he's still digging. And what he's about to find will create a town so rich, so violent, and so completely insane that its very name will become a warning to parents across America. When children misbehave in San Francisco, their mothers would say, "Keep acting like that, and we'll send you to Bodie." And the children, they would straighten right up, because everyone knew what happened in Bodie. Before we dive into this story, if you love untold tales from the Wild West, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is one of the craziest stories I've ever researched, and trust me, you won't want to miss where this goes. And if you think you know how this ends, you don't. So stick around. Now, let's talk about the man who started it all. Let's go back to that frozen mountainside in 1815. William Bodie wasn't looking for glory. He'd spent 10 years chasing gold across California, finding just enough to keep going, never enough to get rich. He was 45 years old. His body was breaking down. His lungs rattled from years breathing in mine dust. His fingers were permanently blackened from handling ore. His back was crooked from swinging a pickaxe 10 hours a day. This was probably his last season. He and his partner, a man named E.S. Black Taylor, had staked a claim in a desolate valley that nobody else wanted. Too high, too cold, too far from anywhere that mattered. The elevation was 830 feet, high enough that snow fell 9 months out of the year, high enough that you could barely breathe when you first arrived, high enough that most prospectors took one look and kept riding. But Bodie was stubborn, always had been. That's what kept him alive through a decade of disappointment. That's what kept him digging when smarter men quit. They called it Body Bluff. Just the two of them, 2 tents, and a dream that was probably going to kill them. On an October morning in 1809, Bodie's pickaxe struck something that rang different. Not the dull thud of worthless rock, not the soft crunch of dirt, but a sharp, clear ping that every prospector dreams about. He'd hit a vein, but not just any vein. A vein of gold ore so rich, so pure, that when he held it up to the sunlight, it actually glittered. Flecks of gold visible to the naked eye, the kind of ore that made men weep with joy. William Bodie had just discovered one of the richest gold deposits in American history. He stood there, holding that rock in his frozen fingers, probably thinking about everything he'd suffered through to find this moment, 10 years of failure. 10 years of watching other men strike it rich while he went hungry. 10 years of sleeping in the dirt and eating beans from a can. Finally, it was his turn. He would never live to see what it became. 3 weeks later, in early November 1859, the first real storm of winter rolled in. Heavy snow, killing cold, the kind of weather that turned the mountains into a death trap. But they were running low on supplies. Someone had to make the trek to Monoville, the nearest settlement, about 20 miles away. Someone had to get food, blankets, whiskey, enough to last through the winter while they worked the claim. William Bodie volunteered. He'd survived winters before. He knew these mountains. He set out on a Tuesday morning with 2 mules and a list of supplies. His partner, Black Taylor, watched him disappear into the snow. That was the last time anyone saw William Bodie alive. When he didn't come back after a week, Taylor assumed he'd decided to wait out the storm in Monoville. When he didn't come back after 2 weeks, Taylor started to worry. When he didn't come back after a month, Taylor knew. They found his body the next spring, in April 1860, when the snow finally melted. He'd made it 3 miles, just 3 miles from camp. He was frozen solid in a snowdrift, still gripping the lead rope for his mules. The mules were dead too, frozen in their tracks. The supplies were never found, probably buried somewhere under 10 feet of snow. William Bodie died within sight of the richest gold strike in California. He died before he saw a single dollar from his discovery. He died before the first building went up. He died before the town that would bear his name became the most infamous place in America. And here's the darkest irony. When they buried him in that spring of 1860, only 3 other prospectors showed up for the funeral. His partner, Black Taylor, and 2 others who'd heard about the strike and come to try their luck. 20 years later, his grave would be surrounded by thousands. The cemetery would hold hundreds of bodies. The town would be crawling with more people than had ever lived in that valley before. But William Bodie would never know, the town that destroyed itself, that drowned in its own violence and greed, that became a byword for evil across America. It all started with one frozen man in a snowdrift who never lived to see his dream become a nightmare. But his discovery was about to change everything. For the first few years, nothing much happened. A few miners trickled in. A handful of shacks went up. Bodie was just another struggling mining camp, home to maybe 20 or 30 desperate men living in tents and lean-tos. Then, in 1863, they found the real vein, the Fortuna Ledge, a seam of gold ore running deep into the mountain, hundreds of feet down, worth millions, millions. Word spread like wildfire. Within months, hundreds of prospectors arrived. Within a year, thousands. By 1807, Bodie had exploded from a frozen outpost to a roaring city of nearly 10,000 people. That's bigger than Los Angeles at the time. But here's what made Bodie different from other mining towns. Here's what made it special, and eventually what made it hell on earth. The gold just kept coming. Let me give you some numbers that will blow your mind. At its peak, the mines around Bodie were producing $3 million in gold and silver per year. That's roughly $85 million in today's money. Every single year, The Standard Mine alone had produced over $15 million by 1881. That's nearly $500 million today from one mine. And there were dozens of mines. The streets of Bodie weren't paved with gold. They were literally built on top of mountains of crushed ore. You could bend down, pick up a rock, and find gold dust in the cracks. By 1879, Bodie had transformed from a collection of shacks into a full-blown city. Main Street stretched for nearly a mile, lined with 3-story buildings, 65 saloons, 7 breweries, numerous gambling houses running 24 hours a day, dance halls where women in red dresses entertained miners with more money than sense. There was an opera house, a bank, a railroad station, a Wells Fargo office, a Chinatown with over 300 residents, a red light district so notorious that preachers in San Francisco used it as an example of Satan's playground on earth. The town had its own brass band, its own fire department with mechanized steam engines, had its own newspaper, the Bodie Standard, which published daily accounts of murders, claim-jumping, fires, and general mayhem. They even had a respectable district where actual families lived. Doctors, lawyers, merchants, people trying to build a normal life in the most abnormal place imaginable. Here's how rich this town was. Miners were making $5 a day. That doesn't sound like much until you realize that's about $50 per day in modern money. And they worked every day, every single day, no weekends, no holidays, just work, get paid, spend it all, and do it again tomorrow. But the real money wasn't being made in the mines. It was being made off the miners. Saloon owners were clearing thousands per week. The owner of the Cosmopolitan Saloon, a man named Pat Reddy, made so much money he built himself a mansion in San Francisco and only came to Bodie once a month to collect his profits. He once said, "I don't need to be in Bodie. The money flows whether I'm there or not." Dance hall girls could make $50 a night just in tips. In today's money, that's like making $1,500 in a single shift. Some of the more popular girls, like Diamond Lil and French Marie, were pulling down more than the mine superintendents. They wore silk dresses from Paris and had jewelry that would make a duchess jealous. One merchant, a man named Jim Kane, started with a small general store in 1870. He sold flour, pickaxes, rope, tobacco set, basic supplies. Within 3 years, he owned half the commercial real estate on Main Street. He became a millionaire just selling flour and pickaxes. When someone asked him the secret to his success, he said, "Simple. Charge double what it's worth, and they'll pay it, because there's nowhere else to go." The Bodie Bank held over $2 million in deposits. That's $60 million today. In a town that didn't even exist 20 years earlier. The bank vault was so full of gold bars that they had to reinforce the floor to support the weight. There was so much money in Bodie that when Wells Fargo needed to transport gold shipments to San Francisco, they required armed escorts of 12 men with rifles, and they still got robbed regularly. In 1880 alone, there were 7 attempted stagecoach robberies on the Bodie route. 3 were successful. The bandits made off with over $40,000 in gold. More than $1 million today. But what was it actually like to live in Bodie during the boom years? You wake at 5 a.m. in a boarding house that houses 50 men in bunk beds. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale whiskey, and tobacco smoke. Breakfast is beans and coffee at a Chinese restaurant, 25 cents, about $7.50 today. By 6 a.m., you're down in the mine. The standard mine goes down 200 feet. It's over 100 degrees down there, even though it's freezing on the surface. The air is bad. You can barely breathe. 10 hours of swinging a pickaxe. Your hands bleed, your back screams, hammers hitting rock, dynamite explosions, men shouting, ore carts grinding on rails. By 4 p.m. you wash off in a bucket of cold water and head to Main Street. Now the real day begins. The Occidental Saloon, 3 whiskeys. Poker, you lose $5, your entire day's wages. You don't care. The dance hall, $1 per dance. $3 for her watered-down drink. By midnight, you're broke. Then you do it all again tomorrow. This was life in Bodie. Work, drink, gamble, repeat. Some men lasted years. Some lasted weeks. Some never left. Just another body in the cemetery on the hill. But here's the thing about sudden wealth in a lawless place. It attracts every criminal, con artist, gunfighter, and desperado within 1,000 miles. And they all came to Bodie. By 1878, the violence had already started. The Bodie Standard began keeping a running tally of deaths. They called it the Daily Bag of Bones. The shootings in the street, stabbings in the saloons, claim-jumping murders up in the mines, bodies found in alleys with their pockets turned inside out. The town hired a marshal. He lasted 3 weeks before someone shot him in the back. They hired another one. He quit after a month, saying he'd rather be poor and alive than rich and dead. One visitor from San Francisco wrote in his diary, "I have seen the future of America, and it is Bodie. God help us all." Another wrote simply, "This town is filled with bad men doing bad things." The Reverend F.M. Warrington arrived to establish a church. After 6 months, he left, stating, "I have ministered in rough towns before, but Bodie is not a town. It is a demon." There's a legend about a little girl in San Francisco whose father got a job in Bodie. When she heard they were moving, she wrote in her diary, "Goodbye, God, I'm going to Bodie." Now, some historians claim she actually wrote "Goodbye, God" with excitement. But I don't buy it, because by 1879, everyone knew what Bodie was. It was the most dangerous place in America. Let me tell you about 1879, the year Bodie earned its reputation forever. In that single year, there were 64 documented murders in Bodie. 64. That's more than 1 per week. But here's the truly insane part. Those are just the reported murders. The ones that made it into the newspaper. The ones with witnesses or bodies that were actually found. Historians estimate the real number was probably closer to 100, because bodies disappeared all the time in Bodie. Men went into the mines and never came out. People vanished in the middle of the night. Sometimes you'd just find a bloodstain and nobody would ask questions. The population was about 10,000 at this point. That means roughly 1 in every 100 residents was murdered that year. For comparison, the modern murder rate in the most dangerous city in America is about 60 per 100,000. In Bodie, It was literally 20 times higher. You were more likely to die violently in Bodie than in an active war zone. It wasn't like murders were happening in dark alleys at midnight. They happened everywhere all the time, in broad daylight. Let me tell you about some specific cases that made Bodie infamous. The Tom Peasley case. A man named Tom Peasley shot another man dead in the middle of Main Street at noon on a Wednesday in July 1879. His reason? The man had looked at him wrong. Here's what actually happened. Peasley was walking out of a saloon. Another miner, a man named Jack Williams, was walking in. Their shoulders brushed. Williams said, "Watch where you're going." Peasley stopped, turned around, said, "What did you say to me?" Williams repeated it. "I said, watch where you're going." Peasley pulled his pistol and shot Williams in the chest once. Williams dropped dead on the wooden boardwalk. Blood pooled around his body. Peasley holstered his gun, stepped over the corpse, and went back into the saloon to finish his drink. 40 people witnessed this. 40 people saw a man murdered for no reason. The marshal arrested Peasley an hour later. At the trial, Peasley's lawyer argued that Williams had been aggressive in his tone, that Peasley had felt threatened, that in Bodie a man had a right to defend himself from verbal aggression. The jury deliberated for 20 minutes. Verdict: not guilty. Self-defense. Tom Peasley walked free. He lived in Bodie for another 3 years before someone shot him in the back during a card game. His killer was never found. The Maiden Alley Massacre. 2 miners arguing over cards at the Occidental Saloon in August 18, and John Traylor accused Michael Dolan of cheating at faro. Dolan pulled a knife. Traylor pulled a pistol. Dolan stabbed Traylor in the shoulder. Traylor shot Dolan in the stomach. Both kept fighting. Another shot to the chest. Another stab to the neck. Both men bled out on the saloon floor, while 40 other patrons kept playing cards and drinking whiskey. The bartender later testified, "I dragged both bodies outside. They were making a mess of my floor." Nobody was arrested. 40 witnesses claimed they saw nothing. The murder of Wong Kee. In September 1807, a white miner named James Murphy accused Chinese immigrant Wong Kee of rigging a gambling game. Murphy lost $20. Murphy gathered 15 friends. After midnight, they found Wong Kee walking home. They dragged him to Main Street and beat him to death with their fists and boots. It took 20 minutes. Wong Kee screamed. People watched from windows. Nobody helped. The marshal arrested all 16 men. The judge released them the next morning, ruling that since Wong Kee was a Chinese engaged in illegal gambling, his death was a natural consequence of criminal activity. Murphy died 6 months later in a tunnel collapse. Some said Chinese miners had weakened the support beams. Nobody investigated. The Ella Mae Johnson story. Ella Mae Johnson was 19, a dance hall girl at the Palace. She'd come from Missouri following a man who abandoned her within a week. One night in October 1879, a drunk miner grabbed her roughly. She pushed him away. He hit her, splitting her lip. The bouncer threw him out. The miner returned with 3 friends. They beat the bouncer unconscious with axe handles, then found Ella Mae hiding in the back room. They dragged her to Main Street and beat her, broke her nose, cracked 2 ribs, knocked out 3 teeth. Nobody helped. Nobody called the marshal. Ella May left Bodie the next morning. Years later, a reporter found her in Sacramento. When asked about Bodie, she said, "That wasn't a town. It was hell with wooden sidewalks. The 4 men who beat her were never arrested. The town kept trying to establish order. They went through marshals like tissues. One marshal, a tough Texan named John Kurgan, actually lasted 6 months. He was known for walking into saloons with 2 guns drawn and arresting men in the middle of poker games. He cleaned up the town, temporarily. Then someone shot him through his boarding house window while he slept. He survived, but left town the next day. His replacement, a man named Billy O'Hara, was found floating face down in a mine shaft 3 days after taking the job. The coroner ruled it suicide, with his hands tied behind his back. Nobody questioned it, but the violence in Bodie wasn't just random murders. Some of it became legendary, the kind of stories that would get repeated in saloons across the West for decades. The Jake Walensky versus this bad man from Bodie. Duel. There was the famous gunfight between Jake the Jew Walensky and a gunfighter who only went by Bad Man from Bodie, both actual nicknames that appeared in the newspaper, over a woman named Nell. Here's the full story. Nell was a prostitute who worked at the Bonanza Hotel. She was beautiful by Bodie standards, which meant she still had all her teeth and wasn't covered in smallpox scars. Both Jake and Bad Man were courting her, if you can call buying a prostitute drink courting. One night, Bad Man saw Jake leaving Nell's room. The Bad Man waited at the bottom of the stairs. When Jake came down, Bad Man said, "That's my woman." Jake replied, "She's nobody's woman. She's for sale to anyone with $2. Wrong thing to say. Bad Man challenged Jake to meet him in front of the Miners' Union Hall at noon the next day. Word spread fast. By 11:45 a.m., over 300 people had gathered to watch. The marshal, a man named Kurgan, tried to stop it. The crowd threatened to lynch him if he interfered. He backed off. At exactly noon, both men appeared on opposite ends of the street. They walked toward each other, hands hovering over their pistols, like something out of a dime novel. When they were 30 feet apart, Jake drew first. He was fast, but his shot went wide. Hitting a hitching post, Bad Man drew and fired in one smooth motion. The bullet hit Jake in the chest. Jake stumbled, tried to raise his gun again, and collapsed. He died in the dirt while 300 people watched. Bad Man holstered his gun, tipped his hat to Nell, who was watching from a second-story window, and walked back into the saloon to buy drinks for everyone. Cost of the drinks, $40 worth it for the reputation. He was never charged. The district attorney ruled it a fair fight between consenting men. The fact that it was premeditated murder didn't seem to matter. Bad Man lived in Bodie for another year before a man named Three-Finger Jack shot him in the back during a dice game. Three-Finger Jack was never charged. The cycle continued. The Rosa May case. Then there was the case of Rosa May, a prostitute who became a folk hero for killing a man in self-defense. Rosa May was 32 years old, which was ancient for a working girl in Bodie. She'd been in the business since she was 16. She'd seen it all. Nothing shocked her anymore. One night in November 1879, a miner named Rufus Patterson came to her room. He was drunk, not unusual, but he was mean drunk. which was dangerous. He wanted services Rosa didn't provide. She refused. He grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the wall. She reached for the derringer she kept under her pillow. He saw her going for it and tried to stop her. She got there first. She shot Rufus Patterson in the face at point-blank range. The bullet entered below his right eye and exited through the back of his skull. He dropped dead instantly. Rosa May walked downstairs to the saloon, still holding the smoking derringer, and told the bartender, "There's a dead man in my room. You might want to call the marshal." She was arrested. The trial happened 3 days later. The jury deliberated for 15 minutes. Verdict: not guilty. Self-defense. Why? Because in Bodie, even the criminals had standards. You didn't hit women, even working girls. If you did, you deserved what you got. Rosa May had done nothing wrong. She defended herself against a man who was trying to hurt her. When the verdict was read, the entire courtroom erupted in applause. Rosa May became something of a celebrity. Men bought her drinks. Women nodded respectfully when they passed her on the street. Rosa May continued working in Bodie until 1911, when she died of pneumonia at age 4. Nearly 1,000 people showed up to her funeral, more than most respectable funerals. Her headstone reads, "Rosa May, friend to everyone, feared by no one." But by 1880, something was changing. The violence was starting to affect business. Merchants couldn't get insurance. Wells Fargo was threatening to pull out. Families were leaving. The respectable people who'd tried to build a real town were giving up. And more importantly, the easy gold was running out. In 1881, disaster struck. Not the kind Bodie was used to, not violence or crime. Something worse, fire. On July 13, 1881, at around 3 a.m., a young Chinese man named Ah Tai was working in the kitchen of the Lum Key boarding house on King Street. He was cooking breakfast for the miners who would wake up in a few hours. He was tired. His foot caught on the edge of a carpet. He stumbled. His hand knocked over an oil lamp. The lamp fell. The oil spilled. The flames spread. In seconds, the entire kitchen was on fire. Ah Tai tried to put it out with blankets. It didn't work. He ran outside screaming. By then it was too late. The boarding house was made of wood, dried wood, because Bodie was at 8,000 feet and the air was desert dry. The building went up like kindling. The fire spread to the next building, then the next, then the next. Bodie had a volunteer fire department with 2 steam engines. They responded within 10 minutes. It didn't matter. In the summer heat, with wooden buildings packed tight together and a strong wind blowing, the fire was unstoppable. By dawn, 60 buildings were destroyed, an entire business block gone. The Chinese district was completely obliterated. Main Street had a massive gap where thriving businesses had stood just hours before. The Bank of Bodie survived, but the hotel next to it was reduced to ashes. The Miners' Union Hall, where Jake and Bad Man had faced off, was gone. The damage was estimated at over $1 million, nearly $30 million today. They counted the dead, 17 people, most of them Chinese immigrants who'd been sleeping in boarding houses. Some bodies were burned so badly they couldn't be identified. They buried them in a mass grave on the edge of the cemetery. Ah Tai, the young man who'd kicked over the lamp, was found hanged from a telegraph pole the next morning. The coroner ruled it to suicide. His hands were tied behind his back. Again, nobody questioned it. They rebuilt, of course. There was still gold in the ground. But something had changed. The magic was fading. The illusion of permanence was shattered. People started asking, what if it happens again? By 1882, the mines were producing half what they had in 1879. By 1883, half of that. The easy surface gold was gone. The veins were running deeper, requiring more expensive equipment, more workers, more investment for less return. The ore grade was dropping. Where they'd once pulled out chunks of gold you could see with your naked eye. Now they were processing tons of rock to get ounces of gold dust. The Standard Mine, which had produced millions, started losing money. They went deeper, chasing the vein. At 1,500 feet, the heat was unbearable. At 1,800 feet, they hit water. Pumping out the water cost more than the gold was worth. In March 1883, the Standard Mine laid off 200 workers. In May, another 300. By July, the mine was down to a skeleton crew. The Fortuna ledge, which had started it all, was tapped out. They'd followed it as deep as they could go. There was nothing left. One by one, the big mining companies pulled out. Standard Consolidated Mining Company, the Body Bluff Mining Company, the Noonday Company, all gone by 1884. The smaller operations tried to hang on, but without the big companies, there was no infrastructure. The stamp mills shut down, the ore processing facilities closed, the railroad reduced its schedule from daily to weekly. When the money dried up, the people left. It started slowly, a few dozen people per month in 1882, then hundreds. By 1884, the population had dropped to 6,000. The saloons closed, first one, then 5, then 20. By 1880, only 10 saloons remained open on Main Street. The dance halls went dark. The girls left on the morning stage, heading to the next boomtown, the next place where men had money to spend. The Opera House held its last performance in September 1884, a traveling minstrel show that came to a nearly empty theater. The manager counted 14 people in the audience. The show was canceled halfway through. The performers left town the next day, complaining they hadn't been paid. The Bodie Standard newspaper stopped publishing daily in 1880, then weekly in 1886, then monthly in 1887. The final issue came out in December 1888. The headline read, "Goodbye, Bodie. It was fun while it lasted." Main Street, which had once been so crowded you could barely walk, was empty, except for tumbleweeds and stray dogs. Entire blocks of buildings stood vacant. Doors hung open, creaking in the wind. Windows were smashed. Furniture sat in the street where people had abandoned it, not worth the effort to move. One visitor in 1886 wrote in his diary, "I walked down Main Street today. I saw 3 living people and counted 40 empty buildings. This place feels like a graveyard, except the dead won't stay buried." The respectable families left first, the doctors, lawyers, merchants, the people who'd tried to build a real town. They saw the writing on the wall and got out while they could still sell their property. Then the miners left, chasing rumors of strikes in Nevada, Montana, Arizona, anywhere but here. Then the Chinese community left, entire families packing up and heading to San Francisco's Chinatown. Then the prostitutes left, the gamblers, the con artists, even the criminals left, because you can't rob people who don't have any money. The fire department disbanded in 1887 because there was nothing left to protect. The last marshal quit in 1888, saying his salary hadn't been paid in 4 months. Jim Kane, the merchant-turned-millionaire, held on until 1880. He watched his real estate empire crumble as buildings stood empty. He sold everything for pennies on the dollar and died broke in Carson City in 1904. James Kane, owner of the Occidental Saloon, committed suicide in June 1887. His note said simply, "Can't do it anymore. Too many ghosts." Rosa May stayed. She moved into an abandoned boarding house and lived alone on her savings. She told a reporter in 1890, "I've got nowhere else to go. This is my home, even if it's a graveyard now." In 1892, another massive fire destroyed what was left of the business district. This time, nobody rebuilt. By 1893, the population was down to a few hundred. The Bank of Bodie closed its doors. The last mine shut down. The railroad stopped running. In 1894, the post office closed. Officially, Bodie no longer existed. 15 years, that's all it took. 15 years to go from 10,000 people and millions in gold to a handful of stubborn holdouts living in abandoned buildings. Here's the cruel twist: there was still gold in Bodie. A lot of gold. In the 1890s, the total estimated value of gold still in the ground was calculated at over $50 million. That's $18 billion today. But it was too deep, too expensive to extract. The infrastructure was gone. The workers were gone. The money to invest was gone. So the gold just sat there, buried in the mountain, while the town that had killed itself trying to dig it up slowly rotted away. One reporter visited in 1895 and wrote, "I walked down Main Street and did not see a single living soul, only the wind, the ghosts, and the memories of fortunes lost." Today, Bodie is frozen in time. It's a California State Historic Park, one of the best preserved ghost towns in America. About 200 buildings still stand, maintained in a state of arrested decay. That means they don't restore them. They just keep them from falling down completely. The paint is peeling, the wood is weathered gray, but the buildings remain exactly as they were when the last residents walked away. You can walk down Main Street and look through windows of abandoned saloons. Playing cards still on tables from the last hand dealt, and dirt bottles behind the bar covered in decades of dust. A child's toy in the old schoolhouse. The Methodist church still stands, its bell silent. The last service was held in 1927. The piano remains in the sanctuary, untuned for a century. The cemetery sits in a hill overlooking town. Nearly 200 graves, probably twice that many in unmarked plots. Wooden headstones have mostly rotted away. Many just say, "Unknown man died by violence." About 200,000 people visit yearly. They drive the winding mountain road through high desert, unchanged since William Bodie's fatal discovery. They walk streets where men shot each other over cards. They stand in the cemetery reading names of people who died over a century ago, and they feel it. The weight of history, the sense of tragedy, the ghosts. Park rangers will tell you that Bodie is haunted, not in a supernatural sense necessarily, but haunted by memory, haunted by all the violence and greed and broken dreams that soaked into the ground. Some visitors report hearing piano music when they stand outside the old saloons. Others claim they've heard voices, arguments, gunshots echoing down Main Street. Skeptics say it's just the wind. But the wind in Bodie doesn't sound like any other wind. It howls through broken windows with an eerie, almost human quality. One park ranger who worked at Bodie for 20 years before retiring told an interviewer, "I've been all over the American West. I've seen dozens of ghost towns, but Bodie is different. Bodie feels angry, like it's still mad about what happened to it, like it died too young, and it's not ready to let go." Bodie has become a legend, a cautionary tale, a symbol of both the promise and the danger of the American West. It represents everything that could go right. Ordinary people striking it rich, building a city from nothing, living the dream. And everything that could go wrong. Greed, violence, lawlessness, and ultimately self-destruction. Because here's the thing about Bodie. It wasn't destroyed by an outside force. No army invaded. No natural disaster wiped it out. Bodie destroyed itself. The violence drove away families and businesses. The lawlessness made it impossible to build lasting institutions. The obsession with quick wealth meant nobody invested in a sustainable future. Everyone was just trying to get rich fast and get out, and when the easy money ran out, so did everyone else. So what's the final tally for the richest town in America that killed itself in 20 years? Total gold and silver mined over 100 million, or roughly $3 billion today. Total murders, over 500 documented, probably closer to 1,000 in reality. Time from boom to ghost town, 23 years. From William Bodie's frozen body in a snowdrift to a dead town full of ghosts, the story of Bodie is the story of the American West in microcosm. The dream, the rush, the wealth, the violence, and ultimately the emptiness. Today, when you walk through Bodie, you can still feel it. The wind howls through broken windows, dust covers everything, and if you stand very still on Main Street, you can almost hear the ghosts. The piano music from the saloons, the shouts from the gambling halls, the gunshots echoing off the mountains. And if you listen very carefully, you might hear what that little girl from San Francisco wrote in her diary. "Goodbye, God. I'm going to Bodie." She knew what everyone eventually learned. Some fortunes cost too much. Some dreams destroy the dreamers, and some towns are better left buried in the past. What other ghost towns should we explore? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Subscribe for more untold stories from the Wild West. Thanks for watching, and remember, not all that glitters is gold. Sometimes it's just blood on the boardwalk.